Thomas Reed had been worth billions when the call came. But all that wealth turned to ash the moment he heard the trembling voice on the other end of the line. His daughter was gone. Not injured, not missing. Gone. The word hit him like a metal beam to the chest, and for the first time in decades, the man who commanded skylines felt the ground tilt beneath his feet. He had been in London, locked inside a conference room high above the Thames, negotiating a $400 million acquisition that newspapers would later call visionary. At the exact same time, on a rain-slicked bridge back in Chicago, his daughter Emily had been trapped inside a sinking car, the river swallowing her last chance at life. While Thomas had argued about profit margins, her world had gone dark. In the 10 years that followed, the memory of that discrepancy never stopped cutting him. Thomas Reed, once hailed as the man who reshaped the Midwest with steel and glass, now lived in a penthouse too quiet to bear. 56, silver-haired at the temple's posture, still sharp despite nights of fractured sleep, or he ruled a real estate empire yet failed to command a single corner of his own heart. His name gleamed on the side of Reed Tower, rose in headlines, hovered on lists of the most influential men in America. But none of it silenced the echo inside his home, the memory of Emily's laughter chased by the truth of her absence. He had been a distant father. He knew it. Everyone knew it. Emily's childhood had been a mosaic of missed recitals, late arrivals, half-spoken promises drowned by ringing phones. And though he had loved her with an intensity he never learned to express, his love was often buried beneath contracts, flights, and boardrooms. When Emily was 6, she had waited for him in a lilac dress for a birthday party he missed entirely. When she turned 12, her mother Laura finally packed her bags and left him. Emily drifted into adolescence while Thomas buried himself deeper in the empire that was supposed to secure their future. By the time she left for college, she had all but stopped trying to pull him into her life. Daniel, his older child, had walked away too. Their final shouting match still flickered in Thomas's mind like a wound that refused to heal. Daniel had told him he worshipped skyscrapers more than people. Thomas had insisted he was building a legacy. The truth, which neither spoke aloud, was that the cost of that legacy had been their family. After Emily's death, the distance inside Thomas Ripley Reed widened until it felt like a canyon he could never cross. Yet, each year, without fail, on the anniversary of the night the river claimed his daughter, he tried to bridge it. Before dawn broke the sky, he always left Reed Tower without his driver and steered his black sedan toward Oakwood Cemetery, an old sprawl of oaks and weathered stones on the city's quiet edge. The moment he stepped out of the car, the world softened. The air smelled of damp earth and autumn leaves, nothing like the cold, climate-controlled luxury of his penthouse. He walked the winding stone path with a single red rose in his hand, the only flower Emily ever loved. 10 years? Every visit felt heavier than the last, as if grief itself gained weight with time. That morning, however, something in the air felt different. Charged, unsettled. A subtle shift Thomas couldn't name but couldn't ignore. The oak above Emily's grave trembled in the breeze, and for the first time since he started this ritual, he hesitated. He blamed the silence, or maybe he blamed himself. He reached the small rise where Emily rested and stared at the gray granite headstone, simple and unadorned, exactly the way she would have wanted it. Beloved daughter. A phrase too small for a life too short. He knelt, placed the rose at the base, and whispered the same apology he whispered every year. I'm sorry. I should have been there. But that morning, as his voice cracked and the air shifted again, a faint sound, something like a stifled sob, rose from behind the cluster of maples bordering the hill. Thomas froze. No one else ever came here this early. No one else ever stood near Emily's grave. He rose slowly, cautious, curious, a prickle climbing the back of his neck. He stepped around the trees, expecting wind or animals or nothing at all. Instead, he found a man in a worn maintenance jacket kneeling before the headstone, shoulders shaking with grief, so raw it pierced the quiet morning. Beside him sat a small girl, no more than 9, arranging tiny stones in a careful pattern. Her sneakers were scuffed, her jacket faded, her hair tied into 2 slightly uneven ponytails. And her eyes, when she lifted them to meet his, were unmistakable. Thomas's breath caught. The world tilted again, sharper than the night he lost her, because this time the shock didn't come from death. It came from life. Those were Emily's eyes. The same blue ringed with flecks of gold, the same delicate tilt at the outer corners. For a heartbeat, Thomas stood frozen, the weight of a decade crashing into him. He didn't know who the man was. He didn't know why they were there. But as the little girl held his gaze calm and curious, something inside him, something he thought long dead, stirred. A spark, a warning, a truth waiting to break open. And Thomas Reed, a man who had commanded skylines, but failed the people he loved most, felt the first tremor of a plot twist that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his daughter. Thomas Reed did not breathe for several seconds. The resemblance was too sharp, too piercing to dismiss as coincidence. Those eyes, those impossible familiar eyes, held him like a hand around his throat, gentling and suffocating at once. The child stared back without fear, only quiet curiosity, as if she felt no danger at all standing before a man who owned half of Chicago. And perhaps that was the strangest thing. Thomas Reed, who had intimidated titans, barely knew how to hold the gaze of a little girl who looked exactly like his lost daughter. He forced himself to speak. His voice came out rough. "Excuse me. This is my daughter's grave." The man beside the stone, startled, wiping hastily at his face as he stood. His uniform marked him as maintenance staff, Oakwood's ground crew. 30-something lean, brown-haired eyes, still red from crying. He stepped protectively in front of the girl, though not aggressively. "I'm sorry, sir," he said quietly. "We didn't mean to intrude." Thomas's pulse hammered. "Then why are you here?" he demanded. "Why is your child here?" The girl looked up at the man, her protector, with the innocent expectation that he would explain the entire world. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder before answering. "My name is Ethan Carter, and this is Lily." The name meant nothing to Thomas, yet the way Ethan hesitated meant everything. "We're here because—" Ethan drew a breath, steadying himself, like someone about to rip open a wound. "Because Lily's mother mattered to someone I loved deeply, and because Lily belongs here more than I do." Thomas frowned. "Belongs here. This is my daughter's grave." A beat. Then Ethan said the words that detonated the morning into shards. "Lily is your granddaughter." The world snapped. Thomas grabbed the nearest tree just to stay upright. His vision blurred, narrowed, steadied, blurred again. The rose he had brought slipped from his fingers and landed soundlessly on the ground. He stared at Ethan, then at the girl, then back again. "What? What did you just say?" Ethan's voice softened. "Lily is Emily's daughter." The little girl blinked, confused but calm. She traced a finger over her small pyramid of stones, unaware that the foundation of a powerful man's life had just cracked open beneath his feet. Thomas staggered forward. "That's impossible. I would have known. Emily would have told me." Ethan didn't flinch. "She tried," he said, more than once. The words hit harder than any punch. Thomas felt his chest tighten painfully as years of missed calls, ignored messages, and canceled visits crashed into him like a wave of ice. He stared at Ethan in disbelief. How, when? Who is Lily's father? Ethan guided Lily a few steps away, before turning fully to face the man who had everything except the truth. Let me explain, he said. But please, let her not hear all of it. Thomas nodded numbly, and Ethan began. He told him about Michael Hayes, a quiet, gifted carpenter who had been Ethan's best friend since high school. How Michael had met Emily in an art class at a community center. How the two fell deeply, fearlessly in love. How Emily had confided her fears that Thomas would never accept a man without wealth or pedigree. How she had begged Michael not to confront her father until she was ready. How she had blossomed in a tiny apartment in Wicker Park, painting murals on the walls while Michael carved wooden toys for the baby they planned to raise together. Thomas felt each detail like a blade. Michael had proposed one summer evening with a simple silver ring he forged himself. Emily had said yes without hesitation. She had been happy. Thomas realized with a burning in his throat that perhaps she had been more alive in those quiet, humble rooms than she ever was in the penthouse he once forced her to call home. Ethan continued. She went into labor early. Lily was born 2 months before the accident. They were both overwhelmed with joy. They called her their miracle. He paused before the next part, grief tightening his features. That night, the night Emily died, she wasn't alone. My sister Elena was driving. They had gone to an art show in the city. It was raining, the roads were slick. The car spun out and hit the railing on the Jackson Bridge. The river took both of them before help arrived. Thomas closed his eyes as the memory stabbed him fresh sharper than it had in a decade. He had known the headlines, the facts, the cold summaries printed in newspapers, but not the story, not the life Emily had built, not the child she had left behind. And Lily's father, Thomas, whispered. Michael raised her for 3 years, Ethan said, voice trembling. He adored her. She was all he had left of Emily. But grief never left him. One day at a construction site, a beam fell. It killed him instantly. Silence settled between them, a silence thick with loss and guilt and truth long buried. Ethan went on quieter now. Michael named me as Lily's guardian. I've raised her the best I could, and yes, I tried to reach you. 3 times I called your office after Michael died. I left messages. No one ever returned them. Thomas felt the accusation without Ethan ever needing to speak it aloud. Then a small voice broke through the heaviness. Mr. Lilly stood beside him, her hand holding a smooth rose-colored stone. Her eyes, Emily's eyes, studied him with gentle sincerity. Are you sad? The question disarmed him completely. Thomas forced himself to kneel so he could meet her gaze levelly. Yes, he whispered. I'm very sad. That's okay, she said softly. My daddy says people come here when they miss someone. His breath caught. Ethan watched carefully, unsure if Thomas would reach for the child or push her away. Instead, Thomas asked, voice barely steady, Lily, May I know you? The girl considered this, then looked at Ethan. Ethan nodded once. Lily placed the pink stone into Thomas Reed's trembling hand, sealing a truth he never imagined he would hold a second chance, disguised as a child who didn't even know she had just altered the course of his entire life. There is a particular cruelty in discovering that someone you loved lived an entire life beyond your line of sight. For Thomas Reed, that cruelty began unraveling the moment Ethan Carter spoke the words that recast the past decade Emily had loved, had dreamed, had built a future in the shadows he never bothered to illuminate. The revelation did not simply sting, it dismantled him. It demanded he confront the possibility that the daughter he had mourned for 10 years had not only forgiven him long before her death, but it also forged a happiness he never took the time to witness. Ethan's recounting of Emily's secret life carried a gentle precision, the kind born of reverence. It began with the simplest truth, her need to breathe outside her father's shadow. After college, Emily drifted away from skyscraper interiors and charity galas, and gravitated instead toward a modest community art program in Wicker Park. She taught children on weekends, volunteered to paint murals in aging classrooms, wandered through farmers markets with charcoal smudged on her hands. In those small, unadorned spaces, she met Michael Hayes. Michael was the kind of man Thomas would have dismissed instantly, a carpenter with calloused hands, a soft voice, and no pedigree to speak of. Yet he possessed something Thomas never cultivated: time to sit to listen, to learn the contours of Emily's laughter, to understand the weight of her silences. While Thomas traveled to Tokyo to negotiate global expansions, Michael spent long evenings refining wooden toys for children he did not know, and later etching details into the crib he hoped his own child might sleep in one day. Emily fell in love with him the way people fall into sunlight, naturally, unconsciously, with a growing warmth that anchors rather than blinds. She told Ethan and later Michael that she feared Thomas's reaction above all else. Not because she believed her father incapable of kindness, but because she knew he had a blueprint for her life. A blueprint that did not include a carpenter living in a rented apartment 2 miles from the elevated train tracks. Emily did not want to lose either man, but she also understood that her father had never learned to negotiate when it came to the people he loved. He only built, imposed, expanded. He constructed expectations like towers, each one rising higher than the last. Emily wanted none of it. So she made a different blueprint. She and Michael found a small, drafty walk-up with creaking floors and a view of a brick alleyway that glowed with string lights in summer. They painted their living room together, splattering paint on each other like clumsy dancers. She hung her sketches on the walls. He carved frames from reclaimed oak. They talked about buying a little cabin near a lake in Wisconsin, a place where Emily could paint and Michael could build furniture from hand-picked timber. They said the words "our future" with a certainty Thomas had never earned from his daughter. But the most profound chapter of that hidden life came with the discovery of her pregnancy. Ethan described the phone call she made to him the morning she found out. She was breathless, overwhelmed, terrified, radiant. She told him she had never been more certain of anything. She would raise this child with Michael. She would build the family she had longed for as a little girl, waiting for her father to come home from yet another meeting. Emily kept meticulous notes during her pregnancy. Journals full of sketches of tiny hands, hopes written in soft pencil confessions about her fear of telling Thomas. She even wrote a letter intended for a friend explaining why she wasn't ready to reveal the truth to her father. Ethan carried that letter folded neatly inside an envelope. He offered it to Thomas with a kind of solemn respect, as though handing over a relic. In the letter, Emily expressed a fragile hope that time might soften her father's armor. She believed that once the baby arrived, once she found her footing as a mother, she might try again to rebuild their relationship. She wrote that everyone deserved a second chance, even him. The words hollowed out Thomas. For 10 years he had clung to guilt like a punishment well-deserved, never imagining that Emily had left behind forgiveness he never reached in time to receive. Ethan continued, his voice steady, even as the content trembled. He told Thomas about the day Lily was born, how Michael cried in the hospital hallway clutching his newborn daughter like a miracle he feared might vanish if he blinked, how Emily glowed even in her exhaustion, her voice soft and fierce as she whispered promises to the tiny life in her arms. They named her Lily because Emily said she wanted her daughter to grow with resilience from the muddiest places. For 3 years after Emily's death, Michael raised Lily with a tenderness that astonished even Ethan. He worked late shifts, cooked simple dinners, read bedtime stories, and taught Lily to hold a paintbrush even before she could speak in full sentences. His grief was ever present, but it manifested not in self-destruction, but in devotion. He carried Emily's memory like a compass, until the day a beam fell at a construction site and cut the last thread holding his world together. Ethan stepped in as guardian the moment the authorities called him. He did not hesitate. Lily had already lost a mother and a father. Ethan refused to let her lose a home too. He poured every quiet hour of his life into raising her with more love than resources, more heart than stability. He reached out to Thomas, hoping the man would want to know his granddaughter. But nothing came back. Calls disappeared into secretaries' filters. Messages dissolved in the machinery of wealth. Standing before the grave, now Ethan said he never expected to explain all of this. But when Thomas appeared and Lily looked up with Emily's unmistakable eyes, silence was no longer possible. What devastated Thomas most was not the secret itself, but the possibility that if he had been present, truly present, Emily might have trusted him with the truth, might have come home, might still be alive. He stood there listening to the narrative of a life his daughter built without him, and felt the weight of every moment he had missed. Yet somewhere between the grief and the guilt, a strange, fragile clarity emerged. Emily had loved deeply. She had lived fully, and she had left behind a child who carried her eyes her spirit, perhaps even her forgiveness. The past could not be reclaimed. But the story of Emily's secret life offered Thomas something he had not expected. A beginning. There are moments in life when the weight of truth demands action, even from a man who has spent decades hiding behind steel and glass. After learning Lily existed, after hearing the fractured history of Emily's love loss and quiet dreams, Thomas Reed felt something shift inside him. Not suddenly, but with the slow, undeniable force of a thaw after a harsh winter. It was not redemption. Not yet. But it was the first breath of possibility. And possibility for a man who had built an empire from nothing but ambition was a powerful thing. In the days after the revelation at Oakwood Cemetery, Thomas moved like someone living in a dream he could not fully enter. Wherever he went, Lily's eyes followed him. In board meetings, he found his gaze drifting to the windows, imagining her small hands sorting stones in neat rows. At night, in the penthouse, where silence echoed against marble floors, he replayed the moment she handed him the pink stone, the simple gesture that somehow held both innocence and acceptance. He tried to imagine Emily watching, and the thought hollowed him. He wanted to know his granddaughter. He wanted a chance to hold something of Emily again. He wanted in a way that frightened him to be better. Yet he did not know how to begin. The fear that he would fail Lily the same way he had failed her mother clung to him like a shadow. Men like Thomas Reed were not trained in gentleness. They were trained in strategy, in negotiation, in the relentless climb upward. But none of those skills mattered to a 9-year-old girl with tangled ponytails and a heart full of stories he had never been part of. Still, he knew he had to try. And so he returned to Oakwood a week later, not with flowers, but with determination. He found Ethan trimming shrubs near the mausoleum row, sleeves rolled up, sun catching the weariness etched into his face. When he approached, Ethan straightened surprise flickering before he masked it. Thomas spoke first, aware of how strange it felt to defer to a man, half his income, half his privilege, but twice his experience in raising a child. He said he wanted to see Lily again. Not at the cemetery, but somewhere gentle, somewhere open, somewhere she wouldn't associate with grief. Ethan listened carefully, weighing not the power Thomas held, but the sincerity in his voice. He could have refused. He had every right to. Yet Lily had returned home after meeting Thomas with a quiet brightness, the kind she only showed when something stirred her curiosity. And curiosity, Ethan knew, was a fragile thread worth nurturing. So he agreed, but on Lily's terms. When Ethan phoned 3 days later, Thomas felt something tighten in his chest. He answered before the second ring. Ethan explained that he had asked Lily how she felt. She wanted to meet again, but only in a place she loved. Grant Park near the wide lawns and the old oak-lined paths where she often played. Saturday morning, 10 o'clock. Thomas wrote the details with a trembling hand, as though writing coordinates to a place he had spent years searching for. The hours leading up to that meeting stretched like a lifetime. Thomas chose his clothing with a deliberateness that startled even him. No tailored blazer, no engraved cufflinks. He wore simple jeans and a charcoal sweater. Emily had once told him he looked less like a monument and more like a father when he dressed that way. He drove himself again, hands gripping the wheel heart, pounding in a way no high-stakes negotiation had ever managed. Grant Park hummed with weekend life. Children played on the swings, joggers wove between trees, and the air carried the scent of freshly cut grass. Under a tall maple, Thomas spotted Ethan first. Then Lily, swinging her legs on a park bench, an orange jacket zipped to her chin. When she saw him, she slid off the bench with the awkward grace of a child, eager not to seem too eager. Her ponytails bounced as she approached, and for an instant, the world quieted. She stopped a few feet away, her round eyes examining him with a thoughtful seriousness. Thomas greeted her softly. She nodded, then asked if he wanted to see the collection of leaves she had gathered. He knelt to the ground, and something he had not done in years, while she opened her little hands to reveal maple leaves shaped like stars. Her voice, gentle and bright, washed over him like music he had not known he missed. He listened with an attentiveness he had never shown in boardrooms. And she noticed. Children always notice. They spent the morning walking the paths. Lily skipped ahead collecting leaves, pointing at clouds that looked like dragons, offering him scraps of her imagination, as if testing whether he could hold them without breaking. Thomas tried to answer every question, even when they were absurd, even when they revealed how little he knew about the world she lived in. She giggled when he pushed her on the swings too softly. He overcorrected, nearly tipping her backward, and she laughed even harder. Ethan watched from a distance, arms crossed, expression easing, as the morning stretched into something resembling trust. By the time they stopped at a small cafe cart for hot chocolate, Lily stood close enough that her arm brushed Thomas's every few steps. She announced she wanted whipped cream. He bought one for her, then one for himself, just because she said he should try it. Ethan shook his head when Thomas offered to buy him anything, and Thomas, learning slowly, let the moment be. The afternoon warmed. Lily told him she liked to paint. She told him stories about school. She told him she wanted a cat. But Ethan said no cats in their building. Each confession carved a small place for Thomas to stand inside her world. And for the first time in a decade, he felt anchored to something real, something alive. When the sun began to dip, Lily surprised him by taking his hand for a brief second, just long enough to leave its shape imprinted in his palm. She said she wanted to see more of the things her mother loved someday. Paintings, drawings, stories. Thomas promised her he would show her everything he had kept of Emily. He promised, carefully aware of how dangerous promises could be when broken. And as Ethan gathered Lily's things, as she waved goodbye with paint-stained fingers and a leaf tucked behind her ear, Thomas understood the truth. He had been given a doorway back into a life he once lost. A doorway shaped like a little girl with Emily's eyes. Whether he deserved it was another question. But he knew this much: he would walk through it. In the weeks that followed, Thomas Reed discovered that rebuilding a bridge to a child required a different kind of architecture. One without steel beams, without calculations, without blueprints. It was built moment by moment, through presence rather than precision. And so he returned to Grant Park again and again, each visit another tentative step into Lily's growing trust. What began as awkward small talk turned into gentle routines, watching ducks on the lagoon, collecting oddly shaped leaves, sharing warm pretzels from the vendor near the fountain. Lily would chatter about school or art or the stories she made up in her head. Thomas found himself listening with a devotion he had never managed for anyone before. Slowly, she began to reach for his hand, without being asked. Ethan noticed. He did not say much, but something in his posture softened, and the wary glances he used to give Thomas became less frequent. Still, he kept his promises carefully guarded. He had raised Lily alone for years, and he had no intention of letting wealth or guilt sweep in like a storm. But he saw Lily's smile widen when she knew Thomas was coming. He saw the way she lit up at the chance to show him something she had painted. And so cautiously, he allowed the connection to grow. One afternoon near the end of October, Thomas suggested something new. He wanted to invite them both to his penthouse, not for grandeur, not to impress them, but to show Lily the pieces of Emily he had kept hidden away. Ethan hesitated. Stepping into the world of the Reed Tower meant stepping into the space of a man who could buy and sell entire city blocks with a single phone call. But when he asked Lily what she wanted, she did not hesitate at all. She wanted to see where her mother had once lived. She wanted to see her mother's paintings. That was all it took. On a crisp Saturday morning, Thomas sent his driver to pick them up. Lily clutched her small backpack the whole ride, her eyes widening as the car pulled beneath the massive glass facade of the Reed Tower. Inside the private elevator, she stood close to Ethan, whispering that her ears popped from how fast it moved. When the doors slid open, she stepped forward as though entering another world. The penthouse stretched open with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's sweeping skyline. Everything gleamed. Everything echoed. It was a city of quiet marble and polished steel. Lily whispered a soft whoa under her breath. Ethan lingered by the entrance, visibly uncomfortable in a place where nothing had ever known dust or disorder. Thomas noticed. For the first time, he felt ashamed of the coldness he once called accomplishment. He led them to his private study instead. This room was different, smaller, warmer, its walls lined with art Emily had created. Lily stopped in front of a watercolor painting of a lake at sunset. The hues washed across her face as she gazed up at it, eyes shining. Thomas explained that Emily had painted it when she was 19, dreaming of living somewhere quiet and beautiful. Lily traced the air in front of the painting, as though touching a place she wished she could step into. Then Thomas retrieved a wooden box from the corner of the room. Inside were Emily's sketches, her journals, the tiny lion pendant she once wore as a child. Lily held it carefully before slipping it over her head, her expression softening in a way that made Thomas's heart tighten. Ethan knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. He whispered how much Emily would have loved to see her with it. The afternoon unfolded gently. Lily sat cross-legged on the rug, studying each drawing with reverence. Ethan spoke quietly with Thomas by the window, finally acknowledging the sincerity he saw growing day by day. Thomas admitted his fear of failing Lily the way he had failed Emily. Ethan said nothing at first, but eventually answered that showing up mattered more than perfection. When it was time to leave, Lily hugged Thomas without prompting, a quick, firm embrace that surprised all three of them. She promised she would draw him something for next time. As she stepped into the elevator, she held up the lion pendant and announced that it made her feel brave. The doors closed, leaving Thomas standing alone in the quiet hallway, one hand resting over the place where she had hugged him. For the first time in years, the penthouse did not feel quite so empty. And for the first time in his life, Thomas Reed understood that love, real love, was not built on grand gestures or towering achievements. It was built on afternoons like this, on small hands holding a pendant, on the chance to begin again. For a while, it seemed as if the world had begun to stitch itself back together with threads Thomas Reed had long forgotten how to use. His weekends were no longer hollow echoes swallowed by empty penthouse walls. They were spent in parks, art rooms, tiny kitchens, and the warm disorder of a life lived simply. Lily's laughter had begun to weave itself into the rhythm of his days, and Ethan's guarded nods had softened into quiet camaraderie. Yet just as the future began to take shape, a complication surfaced, small at first, then unsettling, then painful. It started with a phone call from Lily's school. The teacher's voice was gentle, the kind that tried to cushion truth with warmth. Lily had grown withdrawn. She still completed assignments, still followed instructions, but without her usual spark. She sat alone at recess. She seemed distracted, quieter, as though something essential inside her had dimmed. When asked if anything was wrong, she insisted she was fine. Of course she did. Children learned early how to protect the adults they loved. The meeting with Miss Thompson, the school counselor, took place that Thursday afternoon. Ethan arrived in worn boots and a jacket he had patched twice on the elbows. Thomas arrived moments later, wearing a suit far too immaculate for the cramped counseling office, looking like a man who would have given away every dollar he owned to hear that Lily was happy. Miss Thompson folded her hands on her lap, choosing her words with care. Lily is an exceptionally kind child. Thoughtful, creative. But lately she seems burdened, as if she's carrying a question she doesn't know how to ask. It was Ethan who understood first. His shoulders tightened, his jaw clenched, with the recognition of a problem he had feared since the moment Thomas appeared at the cemetery. The questions had started at recess. Why do you have two dads? Why does your grandpa pick you up, but he's not your dad's dad? Why doesn't your mom come? What happened to your real parents? Children could be cruel without meaning to be. Curiosity in small hearts sometimes cut deeper than mockery. When Lily returned home that evening, she tried to be her usual self, spreading her homework on the kitchen table as Ethan heated up leftover soup. But the moment Thomas knocked at the door for their scheduled visit, she froze. Ethan saw it immediately, the stiffness in her shoulders, the way her hand hovered uncertainly over the page, the way she avoided looking at either of them. This wasn't fear. It was confusion. Lily barely touched her dinner. She answered Thomas's questions with nods instead of stories. Even her smile seemed cautious, like someone guarding a fragile secret. When the dishes were cleaned and her bedtime routine approached, Ethan finally sat beside her on the couch. Thomas remained standing, unsure if he belonged, unsure how to help. "Sweetheart," Ethan said softly, "we talked to Miss Thompson today." Lily blinked quickly, swallowing. "She said, you've been quiet at school," Thomas murmured, stepping closer. "And we're worried. We want to help." For a long moment, Lily said nothing. Then her lips parted, and the truth slipped out on a whisper that trembled like a hurt bird. The kids asked, "Why my family looks weird." The air changed. Ethan's breath caught. Thomas felt something inside him fracture. Weird how Ethan asked gently. "Because I don't have a mom," she said, voice cracking. "And because I have 2 dads and a grandpa who just showed up," and she stopped, tears brimming. "I don't know what to say. I just want to be normal." The words landed like stones. Thomas knelt in front of her, heart swelling with guilt he couldn't articulate. "Lily," he whispered, "you are the most beautiful kind of normal. There is no wrong way to have a family." "But why is it so complicated?" she cried. "Why can't my mom be here? Why can't everything just be simple?" Ethan pulled her into his arms. She folded into him like she had done 1,000 times, but for the first time, he could not shield her from the truth. He looked at Thomas' eyes, pleading for something he couldn't quite ask. Thomas sat beside them, awkward, uncertain, yet determined. "Families come in all shapes," he said carefully. "Some kids have 1 parent, some have 2. Some live with grandparents, some with uncles or guardians. And some," his voice softened, "some are lucky enough to have people who love them from different parts of life." Lily sniffed. "Like you and Dad and Uncle Daniel," yes, Thomas said. "Like all of us. We love you. That's what makes us a family." The next day they met with Miss Thompson again. She suggested something practical and constructive, a classroom lesson about different family structures. They agreed instantly. A week later, Lily sat in her classroom as her teacher introduced stories about children raised by grandparents, step-parents, adoptive families, foster parents. Lily listened. She watched her classmates' faces as they learned that families were not limited to one shape. For the first time in days, Lily lifted her hand to speak. "My family is special," she said. "I have a dad and a grandpa and an uncle, and they all love me." No one laughed. No one whispered. Miss Thompson later reported that Lily had begun playing at recess again. She had drawn a picture of her family: Ethan with his warm smile, Daniel with his drafting pen behind his ear, and Thomas standing tall, but with softer eyes. But the moment that sealed everything came later that night. Lily curled up beside Thomas on Ethan's worn sofa and rested her head on his shoulder. "You can be sad," she told him, echoing something he had said weeks before. "But you're not alone. You have me now." Her small hand slipped into his, and Thomas felt the tremor of a truth he had resisted for 10 years. He had failed Emily, but he would not fail her daughter. Not ever again. There are turning points in life that arrive quietly disguised as ordinary days. Others strike like lightning. For Thomas Reed, the moment he realized he could not truly be part of Lily's world without confronting his past, arrived with a sharp and painful clarity. After the school incident eased, after Lily began smiling freely again, there remained a fracture he could no longer ignore: his relationship with his son Daniel. A bridge burned long ago still smoldered in the shadows of everything new he was trying to build. If Lily was to grow within a family, a whole family, then Thomas needed to mend the bond he had helped break. The decision came late one evening while he stood alone in the penthouse, staring at a framed photo of Emily and Daniel as children. Emily had her arm looped around her older brother's waist, both of them grinning with missing baby teeth. In the background stood Thomas, younger, thinner, wearing a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He remembered the day it was taken. He had arrived late. They had waited. Now Lily waited for a family she did not fully understand. And Daniel existed on the outskirts of that family, deliberately distant from the man who had shaped him and wounded him in equal measure. Thomas could not ask his granddaughter to accept him if his own son could not. So he called Daniel. The line rang. Thomas considered hanging up after the second ring, then the third. But then Daniel answered, his voice familiar yet colder, as if years had calcified around each syllable. Dad, it had been so long since Thomas had heard the words spoken without accusation that he momentarily forgot how to reply. I need to speak with you, Thomas finally said. It's important. About Emily. And about someone else. The silence on the other end stretched taut and wary. They agreed to meet the next morning at a small cafe in River North neutral territory, where neither man held the advantage. When Thomas arrived, Daniel was already seated wearing a simple sweater and jeans, his dark hair threaded with early streaks of gray, a consequence of long nights in design studios and a life lived without a father to lean on. He did not stand when Thomas approached. He only watched him with the expression of a man bracing for impact. "Thank you for meeting me," Thomas said, taking his seat. "You said it was about Emily." Thomas inhaled. The truth he had carried in secret these past weeks pushed forward with a weight that nearly buckled him. She had a daughter. Daniel froze. His fingers tightened around his coffee cup. "What a little girl," Thomas said softly. "Her name is Lily. She's 9. Daniel's eyes widened, then narrowed in disbelief. "Emily had a child, and you knew how long, not long. I only found out recently, at her grave." Daniel stared as though the air had been stolen from his lungs. He leaned back, shaking his head. "I don't understand. She never told me. She never reached out." "She tried with me," Thomas admitted, voice heavy with regret. "I was unreachable, or unwilling, or too buried in work to see what mattered." The words tasted bitter. Daniel could hear the honesty in them, and for the first time in years, the hard edge of his gaze wavered. Thomas told him everything about Ethan, about Michael Hayes, about the accident, about Lily's early years, and the letter Emily had written and never sent. As he spoke, Daniel listened with his jaw clenched and eyes glassy, absorbing the truth piece by piece. Each revelation twisted into something sharper inside him. Grief, bewilderment, guilt, longing. When Thomas finished, Daniel dropped his head into his hands. "She had a whole life," he whispered, "and we knew nothing." "Because I wasn't there," Thomas answered softly. Daniel looked up. "I could have been part of her life. I could have met Lily when she was born. I could have been an uncle. I could have." His voice broke. "And now she's gone." The cafe felt unbearably small. Outside the window, commuters hurried by, unaware that a father and son were trying to salvage a decade's worth of silence. Thomas reached for something he hadn't used in years, truth without defense. "Daniel, I can't fix the past. But Lily is here. She's bright and kind and curious. She asked about you. She wants to meet you." The hesitation in Daniel's eyes flickered and cracked. "What did you tell her about me? That you're talented? That you design beautiful buildings? That you loved your sister?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Not that we don't talk, no," Thomas said. "That is my failure, not yours." The answer settled between them gently. Something in Daniel loosened. "When can I meet her?" he finally asked. And just like that, the first stone in their broken bridge was laid. They met at the Chicago Children's Museum the following Saturday. Lily was in the art section, drawing a dinosaur larger than her torso, when Thomas and Ethan brought Daniel over. She looked up, eyes bright, and immediately recognized him from the stories Thomas had shared. "Your Uncle Daniel," she said, as if confirming a legend. Daniel knelt, stunned by both her resemblance to Emily and the effortless trust in her voice. "Yes," he breathed. "And you must be Lily." She showed him her dinosaur drawing. "Do you want to help me make it look more real?" Daniel's laugh came out unexpectedly warm. "I can try." Within minutes, the two sat shoulder to shoulder, designing buildings for the dinosaur to stomp on. Lily listened to Daniel explain architecture as though hearing secrets of the universe. From across the room, Ethan and Thomas watched. Ethan murmured, "She likes him." Thomas nodded, emotion tightening his chest. She should. They share the same stubbornness. Later they went for pizza. Lily insisted Daniel sit beside her, and he did, telling her stories about Emily's childhood stories. Thomas had forgotten stories. Ethan had never heard stories Lily held on to like precious gifts. Watching them, Thomas realized he was witnessing something rare, the beginning of healing he had not orchestrated nor controlled. When they parted that evening, Daniel lingered. "Dad," he said quietly, not looking directly at Thomas, "I'm not saying everything is forgiven. Not yet. But today was good. She's a remarkable kid. She is," Thomas said. "And I want you to be part of her life." Daniel nodded. "I want that too." But their family had one more fracture waiting to surface, one that had been silent for years, yet carried its own gravity. 2 weeks after Daniel and Lily met, the past returned in the form of a sharp knock on Ethan's apartment door. A woman stood there, tall, composed, elegant, with hair the color of winter sunlight and eyes shaped by determination and regret. Laura Reed, Emily's mother, Thomas's ex-wife. "I have a right to meet my granddaughter," she said. Her arrival was not just inevitable. It was the next storm. Laura Reed's arrival struck the fragile equilibrium around Lily with the force of a long-buried fault line shifting. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway of his small apartment, and the scent of simmering tomato soup drifting through the room, while Lily's colorful drawings fluttered gently on the refrigerator behind him. Laura carried herself with the controlled poise of a woman stitched together by years of solitude. Yet her voice trembled faintly as she repeated her claim. "I have a right to meet my granddaughter." Ethan hesitated, unsure whether he should step aside or shield Lily from this new storm. Laura's presence was powerful, almost imposing, but beneath it, he sensed the same raw longing he had seen in Emily whenever she spoke of her mother. Even so, his instinct was protective. He straightened, keeping his tone polite but firm. "Lily isn't here right now, and this isn't the way to do this. You should talk to Thomas first." Laura's jaw tightened. "I tried. He doesn't answer." Ethan exhaled through his nose, recognizing the truth in that. He reached for his phone. "Wait here," he said. The moment Thomas answered his call, his voice sharpened at the news. "Don't let her leave. I'll be there soon." For the first time in years, Thomas sounded afraid of losing a moment he could not replace. They gathered less than an hour later, inside a quiet meeting room at a small community center. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Lily sat beside Ethan's legs, dangling from her chair, anxiously twisting the string on her jacket. Thomas entered with a heaviness in his step, carrying years of unresolved pain behind him. Laura stood across the room, clutching her hands, her composure wavering as she finally faced the granddaughter she had never known. Lily looked up wide-eyed, seeking clues in Ethan's posture for how she should feel. Seeing her uncertainty, Laura softened immediately. She lowered herself to the child's level voice, barely above a whisper. "Hello, sweetheart. I'm Laura. I'm your grandmother." Lily blinked, her head tilting with cautious curiosity. "Like Grandpa Thomas?" she asked. "Yes." Laura whispered, her smile shaking. "Just like him." Lily hesitated only a beat before asking the question that unraveled everyone in the room. "What were you like when my mom was little?" Laura gasped softly, as though struck by memory and grief at once. She reached into her purse with trembling fingers. "I have pictures," she murmured. "Stories, too. Lots of them, if you want to hear." Lily nodded shyly, and with that simple gesture, the storm that had followed Laura inside dissolved. They gathered around the table while Laura spread out photographs, Emily covered in finger paint as a toddler, Emily winning her 8th grade art fair, Emily twirling during a summer storm. Lily leaned in, absorbing every image with reverence, studying each one, like a puzzle piece of herself she had never seen. Thomas watched quietly from the other side, chest tightening, as he witnessed Lily discovering her mother in ways he had forgotten to preserve. When the meeting ended, Lily hugged Laura, an awkward but genuine embrace. Laura trembled, fighting tears she had held back for over a decade. "Will you come again?" Lily asked. Laura nodded, unable to form words. "As often as you want," she finally whispered. In the weeks that followed, their fragile family learned to expand around one another without collapsing. Laura began spending slow afternoons with Lily at the park, or helping her water the small plants growing on the apartment windowsill. Ethan found himself surprised at how gently Laura integrated into their routines. She never intruded, always asked before offering gifts, and treated him not as an obstacle, but as a partner in Lily's life. Daniel, observing from a small distance, at first reconnected with his mother, as if rediscovering an old language they both feared they had forgotten. Their shared grief over Emily softened into shared responsibility for Lily. Even Thomas and Laura, once unable to breathe in the same space without old wounds resurfacing, learned to stand side by side, joined by the granddaughter who bridged what years of silence had broken. By the time October came around 11 years after Emily's death, an extraordinary idea took shape between them, without anyone explicitly suggesting it. They would honor her together. And so, on a mild autumn morning, they gathered beneath the old oak at Oakwood Cemetery, Thomas, Laura, Daniel, Ethan, and Lily. It was the first time they arrived not as separate fragments, but as something resembling a family. Each brought something precious. Daniel placed a handwritten letter at the base of the headstone. Laura laid Emily's favorite scarf gently across the grass. Ethan set down a photo of Emily and Michael laughing in a tiny kitchen. Lily offered a drawing of all of them beneath the very tree they stood under, with a smiling woman floating above. "That's my mom," she said. "She's watching us." Afterward, Thomas invited them all to a cabin he had quietly prepared in Wisconsin, a place he had remodeled with sunlight colors Emily loved, and rooms meant for more than one person. When they arrived, Lily squealed at her lavender room overlooking the water. Laura touched the walls as if absorbing the life Emily never lived to enjoy. Ethan stood on the deck, watching Lily run across the yard with Daniel, a serene smile replacing years of fatigue. That evening, they cooked together. Thomas burned the potatoes. Daniel teased him relentlessly. Lily demanded they eat on the porch so the sunset wouldn't be wasted. The sky melted into orange and rose as they raised glasses to Emily. "To her," Thomas said softly. "To her," they echoed. Later, after Lily fell asleep with a sketchbook on her lap, Thomas wandered down to the dock alone. The lake shimmered beneath the stars. Ethan joined him, handing him a mug of tea. "She's happy," Ethan said quietly. "That's what matters." Thomas nodded, eyes reflecting the water. "Do you think Emily would forgive me?" Ethan looked up at the sky. "I think she already has," he said. The silence that followed was warm, filled with the weight of healing. And in that quiet night, Thomas Reed understood something simple and profound. Forgiveness was not the erasing of past mistakes. It was the courage to build something worthy from what remained. Through Lily, through Ethan and Daniel and Laura, he had been granted not a second chance at being a father. He had been given his first true chance at being a family. In the end, Thomas Reed's journey reminds us of a truth every family therapist and grief expert understands deeply. Healing is rarely linear, but always possible when love is given space to breathe. Nothing can rewrite the past, yet courage, accountability, and presence can shape a future where connection thrives in the cracks loss once created. If this story touched you or stirred something familiar in your own life, consider liking and subscribing so more people can discover stories that honor forgiveness and second chances. And before you go, share your voice below by commenting a simple phrase that captures the heart of this journey.